Rampaging across the voxways of the Underhive like a pack of cybermastiffs hell-bent on audio assault vengeance. We are 665.66 UHMR Chemrat Radio, broadcasting live from Joe's Sump Shack.
Whether it's audio rampage or the bloodletting type, it's been a week. With another 6 dead at the hands of the Corridor 54 killer.
Danger.
After months of silence, he has struck again, leaving his skinless victims hanging from old night chassis in Armageddon Memorial Park.
At least the weather is whelming.
This is my new favorite. It's not underwhelming. It's not overwhelming.
It's not over. Not
whelming.
Under. But whelming. I'm very whelmed right now.
My new favorite thing. And I learned it tonight. Bringing you only the finest in pirate voxcasts, I am your captain for this wild ride, Goblin King, joined by Patient Zero in this infestation of all things unfiltered and unmapped, Marky.
Groovy.
That's me.
Our ballad master of heavy bolter suppression, Beast.
Hello, everyone.
And our source for all things that give you teeth, the purveyor of all the wed squig we can consume here in the studio, Kev.
Hola, amigo.
No, it's close.
Owned.
Close, Padre, but today it's definitely Buenos Tadeos.
Buenos Tadeos?
Yeah.
Is that
All
like
my coworkers.
gracias?
Buenos ding dong dias.
All my coworkers love that one.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
All right, guys, so welcome to Under the Hive of Madness. This week, we're diving into part 2 of our creative writing, Horror and Suspense. In part 1, we looked into the foundations of horror, from the genre and subgenres themselves to some of the underlying themes that connect them all into a giant spider's web. In today's episode, we are going to focus on the practical side of writing, covering a range of tips and tricks useful in establishing a spooky atmosphere and building the tension needed to send chills down the spines of your readers or listeners. As a lifelong horror fan myself, I wanted to take a couple of seconds here right up top, though, to talk about my favorites and get into some of your guys' favorites in the horror genre. Marky?
I see dead people.
I'm sorry, what?
That's your favorite, huh? What are some of your favorites in the horror genre?
In the horror
Books,
genre,
movies, TVs.
the absolute favorite I had for a long while was probably The Conjuring. I felt like it had a good mix of different types of horror. Like it had demons, ghosts, freaking I want to say chupa thingies, but
chupa thingies.
No,
I told you to stop making up animals.
But yeah, definitely Conjuring. That was one that got me for a while.
I think I made him shit himself.
Because I like how they kind of intertwined all the movies. So you have that, you have Annabelle, you have La Llorona, you have the Nun.
Oh wait, all those are connected?
Yeah, that's all the same universe.
I just thought it was all the same director and studio. I didn't realize that they were all tied story-wise.
They all deal with Ed and Lorraine Warren, who we should probably cover on Laura's Obscurus because they are actual real people.
Yeah, that'd be dope.
I'd be down. Those guys are cool.
Yeah, but it was I really dug those movies. Like The Nun, dude, that one was gnarly. In broad daylight, just taking people out. It was pretty sweet.
Dude, The Nun, the movie was pretty dope too. The one that takes place in the past.
Dude, that La Llorona one, fuck.
Yeah, that was
so
another gnarly one.
That one's dude. That one got me good.
Yeah, I don't get to watch scary movies very often just because the wifey doesn't appreciate them.
Yeah, same.
So I either have to watch them by myself or vet them out before I have my daughter watch them with me because she's still young. I'm not trying to traumatize her like I did when I was a kid. I was watching Silence of the Lambs and stuff like that when I was 10. So Omen, Silence of the Lambs, Red River, Red Rum shit. That's not Silence of the Lambs, right?
Shining. Oh, The Shining.
Shining, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are all those are all kind of led me into my like horror head phase of watching scary shit. One of my older sisters, she read a lot of Stephen King, and she kind of like bought scary movies, and then I would watch them after her, without her, not to
Gotcha.
your knowledge, unbeknownst to her.
That's the way to go.
I haven't really read a lot of scary books. I'm not sure why that is. Probably because I don't read much. I don't know. I feel like I can't like immerse myself while I'm reading. Like I have to be I have to be immersed like in a movie essentially. I have to have that
Yeah.
ambience.
I mean, everybody kind of has their preferred method of like consuming media, realistically.
So yeah, that's mine. The Conjuring and like all the movies around it. We talked about it a little earlier, like Fear Street. Those were pretty dope. Babysitter, some of the stuff that's on Netflix is pretty dope. Berserk, that is definitely another somewhat horror action anime.
Oh, yeah,
manga.
definitely.
My daughter and I just got done watching.
Oh yeah,
What the
I
hell is
didn't
it
even
called?
think about considering mangas.
Yeah,
or
there's a really
animes.
dope one. I can't remember what the hell it's called, but essentially, this girl, she can see essentially like dead spirits or and ghosts and whatnot. And I guess the lore behind it is if you see them and react to them, they'll kill you. So these things are like sleeping with her, like not sleeping with her, but like sleeping next to her. Like there was one where she woke up and like she was kind of like moving around and she lifted the blanket up and there was like a dead like baby thing like laying on her lap.
Is
It
it
was
a movie or is it a manga?
it's an anime. It's a manga, yeah, but it's an anime that I was watching with my daughter, and it was.
Do you remember the name of it?
I'm trying. The reason it pulled me in was essentially she was at a bus stop, and she was looking at her phone, and out of the corner of her eye, she sees like a black like smoke kind of getting like breathed on her, breathed on her, or something along those lines. Or she hears something and she like kind of looks to the side, and it's like this big, like slug monster thing.
Hmm.
If you look up horror anime, it's probably one of the newer ones that just came out. It's pretty sweet. It's cool. Like she can't react to it, or yep, that's the one.
That right there.
That's one of them. Yeah, she basically like has to go like on a day-to-day basis of having to deal with all these dead things around her. Mariku-chan, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, Mariku-chan. I'm trying to pull up a better picture, but anyway.
Yeah. So for all you anime watchers, Mariku-chan, if you like horror stuff, it was pretty dope. Me and my daughter enjoyed it.
Very cool. Beast?
Horror?
Yeah.
Like horror movies?
Or books or whatever.
I'd say I've been it's either been very like zombie heavy, like apocalyptic style. Like I've always been a big fan of like Dawn of the Dead, Walking Dead even, which is funny because I didn't like it at first. I wouldn't really classify that as like horror, like zombie. Like I like my horrors to be action based. Like Dog Soldiers is by far one of my favorite all time horror movies, and it's basically just about it's werewolves. It's probably one of the best creature design I've ever seen for a werewolf. And it's about British soldiers fighting them on like a training exercise where they're like,
oh yeah, I remember
like,
this
such
one.
it's such a slow burn movie too.
It is, but it's pretty
so
cool
good.
actually.
It's
I thought
so
When
it
it
good.
punches you in
Like-
the face, it punches you.
Yeah, like some of the lines in that movie, like one of the dudes gets his like guts ripped out, and he's like laying on the ground. He's like, "I've been, mate. Go on." And he's like, "No, we got you. He's like, "No." He's like, "My guts are out." He's like, "It's fine. We'll put it back in." And he's like, "They're not gonna fit." He's like, "Of course they'll fit." Like, it's that scene right there. Like, it was, and when I saw it too, I was like, "Oh my god!" Like, my guts are out. Like. And it's like, it sounds tacky. Like, that's the whole thing. When you watch it, it sounds really tacky. But when you like are actually watching it, you're like, no, this is really good. Like, if you look at their movement through the forest and their shooting and stuff, it's like,
yeah, their coordination was actually pretty on point with that one.
Oh,
I
it's
appreciate
phenomenal.
when they take the time to make those scenes right, because
Yeah,
it just makes it that much more believable. Because it's like, if a bunch of sloppy soldiers get murked by a werewolf, you're like, well, they fucking should have checked their quarters, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Dumbass.
Yeah. And these guys, they do they check magazines,
yeah,
really well done. Just attention to detail in the horror world. Love it. 28 Days Later, all time. 28 Days Later, one of my all time favorite zombie horror movies. 28 Weeks Later really sucked, but
I couldn't stop talking about Warm Bodies for a while.
Fuck Warm Bodies! Oh my god! Oh my god! That made me so upset. But yeah, those ones. And then classically, I loved Puppet Master.
Do you like Dawn of the Dead?
Child's Play?
Did you ever say that?
Dawn of the Dead. Yeah, I said Dawn of the Dead. But yeah, classically it was Puppet Master, all of them. Child's Play. Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yep, Friday the 13th, Halloween.
Friday the 13th.
Yeah,
not so much the Halloween I didn't care about.
Really?
Friday the 13th, Friday the 13th was okay, but honestly, Freddy versus Jason, chef kiss.
Yeah, that
best.
That was
I also really liked some very, very alternative horror movies that were like one and done. Virus was
good.
Oh my god, Deep Rising was another one. I really like my zombies and I like my monsters. You know what I mean? So that's been a lot of Virus. Yeah, so good, dude. It's so good.
Have you guys ever seen The Mist? I think it was
The Mist,
Stephen King.
Yeah.
That's actually one of mine. I like that one.
I was literally about to talk about Stephen King. Langoliers was one of my favorite. It wasn't really a horror movie, but it still kind of was. But
there's a lot of Stephen King stuff that straddles the line of suspense and horror.
I think that's what I like about it. Is I think I'm more of a suspense. I think I got that from my mom. Is she liked all the movies? Was it Panic Room? Was one of her favorite movies for a long time. And that's a different kind of horror. Suspense is different, I still kind of consider it all one genre in a way. But The Mist is good.
I mean, it's one of those things it's not an acquired taste, but when you have the taste of it, you can kind of see the differences. Like Saw, I wouldn't consider Saw and Dawn of the Dead similar.
Yeah, I see zombies as different, but that's because zombies I view as more of an action horror. There's subgenres of horror, and I see the difference in that. But I don't see suspense movies as being worth saying they're not horror movies in general.
Yeah. See, I'm very much action horror is my
my
jam.
I prefer action horror as well. I love all the cheesy sci-fi monster movies, the giant spiders murdering everybody, all that kind of stuff.
There's a remake of The Blob.
Wait, what?
That's good.
There was a remake of Blob, and it was so good. It was like an 80s or 90s remake. It's so good.
Maximum Overdrive. That's an oldie, but good.
Yeah, Maximum Overdrive. Hell yeah. The Green Goblin truck.
Yeah. Well, was the Blob the one where the dude or the chick, I can't remember, it was asleep on a raft in the middle of a lake or pond, and when she woke up, the Blob was essentially going through the little cracks on the raft and melting her face as she was asleep. Was that the Blob?
No.
I
don't
mean that's what the Blob does though.
Yeah, it sounds very the Blob-ish, but that doesn't sound like I don't remember that death in the Blob.
No, yeah.
I've also never seen the remake.
Oh, it's so good.
It might have been the remake or something that I was watching, but yeah, I remember specifically the remake swimming away out of the pond, and
that there's that scene where it because I never remember it in a pond, but I do remember this. It falls on this dude, and the girl walks in, and that's the picture he's got pulled up, and it starts to pull back, and the dude's nose peels up, and then his skin starts to peel off as it's happening.
It melts his face off. Yeah, that right there.
Yeah, it's so good.
But shortly after that, he has no more face.
Yeah, Jaws. Would you think Jaws is a horror?
There we go. That's the next scene.
Jaws is definitely a horror film. Jaws sits
Suspense
on the line
horror,
of when horror became its own genre in
I
the
loved
movies.
All the Jaws.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I was gonna
Jaws
say
1,
it if you
2,
didn't play
3.
it.
Jaws 2, where they're at SeaWorld. That was my favorite.
Because I mean, in a sense, would you consider Jurassic Park a horror,
No.
thriller, action?
Action thriller.
I'd say
Science
it's a
fiction.
blockbuster. It's a blockbuster thriller. Because
Yeah.
you can tell it was meant to hit most audiences. Whereas, like, with horror movies, you can tell they're not meant... Like, they know when they made it that not everybody's going to like it. Whereas, like, when they made Jurassic Park, they're like, 8 out of 10 people are probably going to like this movie.
Yeah. Well,
What
and
Go ahead, Ryan.
Jurassic Park was also very much like Jaws and Jurassic Park kind of occupy the same space, just in their respective years. So it's very possible, like 10, 20 years from now, maybe people will look at Jurassic Park as being a horror movie.
That's true. There was a decent amount of gore in it for the time.
Well, and Jaws was also made by Steven Spielberg, so.
Oh, yeah, you're right. That's true.
Deep Blue Sea.
Oh, Deep Blue Sea. Deep Blue
Shut
Sea
up.
is definitely a horror movie.
Shut up.
It's not a good horror movie, but it's
No,
definitely...
the Deep Blue Sea is what I like to call a mistake.
Hey.
Hey, some of us really like that film, okay?
Oh,
And
God.
his leg was like twitching in the water. You're like, God damn! You could see like his intestines and shit.
Yeah, the first time I saw it.
Oh, that's right. You watched it like 10 times on an airplane or something,
Yeah,
didn't you?
yeah, that's why I can't.
Oh,
I
okay.
can't. Flying over to England, an 18-hour flight of Deep
Of
Blue
Deep
Sea.
Blue Sea.
That's what it was. Oh, I can't even look at pictures of it.
Who is that?
Uh,
Familiar? Is that the same guy from? That's not the. No, that's not Blade
That's the
Runner.
dude. That's
No, that's
Thomas
the
Jane
Punisher.
from Deep Blue Sea.
that's
What?
the Punisher.
Punisher. That's what he is. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I was gonna say he looks familiar.
And the Mist.
And the Mist.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, it's Thomas Jane. That's it. He's been in a bunch of shit. All right,
I
Kev,
love him.
it's your go. or whatevers.
I mean, mine, like I said, a lot of mine aren't like the super straight, like blatant horror ones. I do like a lot of the horror based other things though. Like, I mean, some of the horror comedies are great. 8-Legged Freaks,
I love 8-Legged Freaks.
but that in itself is a horror comedy. Scary movies are funny, but I mean, I know that one doesn't count. 8-Legged Freaks is kind of Arachnophobia is a good one. Like I said earlier, one of my moms, I liked Panic Room. That was a good one.
Yeah, Blair Witch. Blair Witch was dope.
I actually never saw Blair Witch.
Really?
Top 10 that's like one of my top 10.
Yeah.
Poltergeist.
Up when I was a kid. Poltergeist is a good one.
I like the Poltergeist series. That was a classic one. I mean, Tremors isn't really horror. That's more comedy, monster movie.
It's horror.
What is it?
Tremors
I
was
would
horror.
classify it.
Was
I
it?
don't
Classified
think
as
Tremors
horror.
is horror anymore, but Tremors
Okay.
was horror.
Okay.
At one point,
Alright,
that
that's
was
fair.
scary.
Tremors 1 and 2 horror. I would
Really?
say.
I could have sworn
Yeah.
at Tremors 2 they acknowledged that it was a joke.
No, they still Tremors 2 was still pretty good.
Maybe it's
Like,
just
there was
that's
some
just
scary moments.
maybe that's movies at the time.
Any movie that traumatized you, like in some degree.
That was Jurassic Park
think-
for me. I had nightmares from Jurassic Park as a kid.
Yeah, I think my brother-in-law had.
I mean,
then
bad.
that would mean Dark. Then that would mean Dark Crystal is a horror.
I mean,
That
also
movie
Star
scared
Wars
the
gave
shit
me
out of me.
nightmares too. But
Yeah.
that's also what I was also.
Star Wars
very...
gave you nightmares.
No, it's not that Star Wars gave me nightmares. It's that my dream was Star Wars inspired,
but scary.
but
Dude.
like terrifying.
Dude, I have to say,
Like
Man.
stormtroopers coming
Empire-
to murder you and things like that.
Empire Strikes Back came out when I was came out on tape when I was like a kid. Like, it came out when I was like a kid. Like when I was young enough that I don't have good memories of that time. And Yoda used to scare the fuck
Yeah.
out of me when I was a kid.
Really?
Like post 6, 7, 8, post 7, 8, not so much, but pre 7, 8, Yoda used to terrify me.
You know, who used to scare me. Fucking what's his name from Neverending Story? The what? I keep wanting to say Farquaad, but that's not his name.
Falcor.
Falcor.
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
My
Falcor.
friend,
Creep me
dude,
the fuck out.
my friend, we used to take pictures of that and show her, and she would get physically upset.
He's just creepy looking, dude. Like who?
He's the luck dragon, man. Come on.
You see that and you're like, that looks friendly.
So there's actually a thing where like when the creature is your size, when you're a little kid and the creature is your size, this is the reason that like Chucky freaks so many kids out. It's more freaky because it's your size. So the reason that like Falcor and Yoda and Chucky and a bunch of these other things like actively freak out little kids more than they freak out adults is because like it's your height. It's a threat that's your height. Like Jason isn't that scary when you're a little kid because he's a big adult and you can run away from him.
Right, and you
Oddly enough.
can slip away. Yeah, as a small child, yeah. Whereas as an adult, you're like, man, that dude can get anywhere I can get.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Dude, I used to have a recurring nightmare of Chucky where I would walk down. Like I remember, I've talked about like the house I grew up in, very phallic-y shaped. So there's a long hallway, right? And I would stand at one end of this hallway, and Chucky would be at the other end. And for me, it's like a scary shit. Like I'm gonna go beat the shit out of that, or I'm gonna die. Kind of scared person. So like Chucky would be at the end of this hallway, right? And I'd run up to him and I'd just start wailing on him, and I'd punch him in the mouth, and he used to bite my knuckle, and that's when I would wake up. But like my, I can't remember the movie, but it's very similar to like you punch him in the mouth, and his mouth would close on my knuckle, and I'd wake up like oh Jesus Christ. Yeah, but because I mean, people have beaten the shit out of Chucky, so I mean, look at
Chucky's been messed the fuck up.
Yeah, the thing that always scared me about Chucky was when he sliced the ACL on that one guy, or the ACLs, and like he just like fell out of his bed, and then Chucky just beats the shit out of him. You're just like, oh god, like I would not want to go like that.
See, like Child's Play, those movies, I used to love them because I thought it was so funny. Because whenever he'd hit people, he'd be like, come here, like the way he would punch people, it used to kill me, dude. I'd laugh. I'd be sitting there laughing at it.
Yeah, it was just creepy, dude. Like, was it the first movie where he lost his hand and he had that little knife thing and he was like crawling through the conveyor belt? Like that shit got me when I was a kid. Now, I mean, you watch this now.
For those of you who aren't on our Patreon, you can join our Patreon for $3 a month, and you can watch a video version of the podcast. This toy right here is awesome. Like, I fucking want this toy on my shelf. This thing looks dope.
No. All that.
Very cool.
I would never get it, dude.
Kev, you got any others?
After Mark brought up some anime, there's a couple of animes that I've watched that were pretty good on the horror, and I think that's where a lot more of my gore ends up. But Terraformers.
Terraformers. Bring that up.
Yeah. Not so much the second season, because that turned into Furry Fights 2.0, but the first season, the baddies in this, and I mean even some of like the political suspense.
Danger.
Yeah, like just look at those things; they're fucking creepy.
So essentially, they're like super smart, super soldier cockroaches that were sent to Mars to terraform it. I think.
So
something along those lines, right?
The plot line for this was they took cockroaches and they souped up their genetics to make them evolutionary, like their evolution would be more rapid, and so that way they could adapt to Mars's environment. But they also sent it up with bacteria and other stuff, and they're basically supposed to tend start the ecology and start the environment up, start terraforming just by being there. And yep,
dude.
They got real big, real fast, and real smart.
Yeah, think like the Hulk, but like monotone, like the things that kill you and feel nothing. But it's like
they don't have emotion. They have the same. It's in a way. There's the cockroach one in the New York subways. It's like that.
Mimic.
Yeah, it's like Mimic. That on Mars, but they're like fucking huge.
Yeah. They don't fuck around.
and they're less cockroachy, more human shaped.
They're almost like gorillas, I want to say.
They're shaped like gorillas, and they're strong like fucking gorillas.
Oh man, Congo
was a good one.
Good film.
Yeah, see, like all mine are like these, like kind of like strange, like more monster, less like gore.
Less straight up horror. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't like Hostel. I don't like Saw.
Yeah, I didn't really. They don't.
Those are.
I really liked Saw until like the fifth one, and then I was like,
The Thing. I mean, we've talked about it a bunch of times. The Thing. I love The Thing. That was great.
Mm.
The Saw movie that broke me was the one where the SWAT team responds to the like trap. It's an iron staircase surrounded in chain link, and the entire SWAT team, like all fucking 10 guys, get onto the staircase at once, which would never fucking happen. And then he closes both sides and electrocutes them all to death. And I was like, I can't fucking watch. I literally cannot watch this anymore. Nobody would fall for that. Nobody in their right mind with any fucking training would fall for that. What the fuck?
I mean,
this is stupid as shit.
The first 3 guys would run up the stairs, and then all the rest of the guys would be like, I don't know, this looks like a trap to me.
Saw expects you to like put too much of like reasoning to the side to accept what's happening. Anyway.
Yeah.
The other one that I really like was The Fly. That was another oldie but goodie.
The Fly's a good one.
There's a body horror anime that I also kind of liked. I wonder if Marky's seen this one. Parasite.
The anime?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, dude. I've watched it like maybe 4 times now because it was my daughter's favorite anime for a while.
I could see that. It's a good one for kids to get the horror. Like it. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, essentially, it's an alien that invades your body and takes over your brain, and then it essentially like
the thing modifies your body into whatever it wants. But the main character, and what's cool and it like is like a weird horror aspect, but also an interesting concept, is he's falls asleep with his headphone cord wrapped around his hand, and it gets into his hand, and that's as far as it can get.
Yeah, it tries to trap his brain.
It only has a certain time frame from when it enters the body before it like matures, and then it loses its ability to infiltrate further. And so it gets into his hand, and like his arm, and that's as far as it gets. So like when he wakes up in the morning, he's like got a hand that's like walking around the room, like on like rubbery extended arm, and then it's like, oh hi, yeah, this is awkward. And it like starts talking to him. He's like, so I was supposed to take over your brain, but that didn't happen. So I guess I'm just your hand. I hope we don't die.
Yeah. If they don't take over the host, essentially they'll like go I failed. I'm going to go kill myself now kind of thing. Yeah. It was pretty brutal anime.
Yeah.
It reminded me of was it Evil Dead, where Ash's hand gets taken over by very very much like that.
Yeah, and then it ends up being the other people that got fully possessed find out about him because he ends up having to like fight one of them in an alley somewhere.
That hand.
But and then once they find out about him, they're like, oh no, we can't allow that, and so he's being hunted by all the full body takeovers. And he's only got his hand to try to defend himself because the hand is like, well, if you die, I die. So
and I don't want to die.
I don't want to die. I'm more about us living and being this weird hybrid thing than dying and everything going back to normal. So let's stay cool. And so it's
Idle Hands. It reminds me of Idle Hands.
You remember, Kevin? There was an old anime, and I haven't been able to find it. I want to say it's not V for Vendetta. That's a movie.
Yeah.
Was it Helsing or something along those lines? But the guy had like a same similar thing. His hand was like possessed, and he would use it to essentially
suck things in.
Yeah, do you remember
Vampire
that?
Hunter D.
Yeah, that's
an old one. Vampire Hunter D is dope.
Me and my coworker both really love that one. We were talking about it like a couple weeks ago.
This
is a good one.
Both Vampire Hunter Ds, the first one in Bloodstar or whatever.
So, fun fact, you know how I found out about this one? Because, like, I didn't have any friends that were really into anime, like, other than, like, super weeby girly anime. Like, not to be judgmental, but, like, we know what we're talking about. Like, everybody knows what I mean when I reference that.
Yep. I'm feeling attacked right now.
I like Tenchi as much as the next guy, but at the same time, there's some, like, weeby girly animes out there. And so, I saw this in a music video that I got off LimeWire, and I was like, I need to watch this. This is fucking cool.
Yeah, his hand is a jerk too.
Oh yeah, his hand is an asshole.
That was the best part.
Yeah, Vampire Hunter D is classic.
Yeah.
I think there's one horror movie that we can all agree on. Event Horizon.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I figured
yeah.
that one was not. We couldn't pick that one. That one's we've talked about that one so many times.
Yeah.
But why not talk about it again? That one's great. You know, we need to watch that movie collectively and do like a reaction video to it.
Yeah.
I'll buy the mushrooms.
Oh, don't you dare!
Don't, dude.
Don't you tempt me? Don't you put that on me, Ricky Bobby?
I have to take a break. You guys, I don't know if you guys heard the details of when Kevin and I did last, and it was a time. It was mighty time. Oh, yeah. Kevin's having a wonderful time, and I'm just dying.
Oh, I mean, it was ups and downs. I've learned to just ride whatever roller coaster I'm on, so you know.
I was just not. It was a bad launch. We had a very
that was the problem. We hit turbulence right off the launch pad.
Yeah, Kevin and I on launch. It just fucked us.
Tom's.
Yes, Satan.
I mean, it's probably no surprise to everybody listening to this, everybody who's listened to our past episodes and you guys, but I'm really big into the Cthulhu mythos. I really liked the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, and if you know anything about the Dark Tower series, the first couple of Dark Tower books anyway, they kind of connect to everything else in the Stephen King universe. Pennywise from It is a type of demon who lives outside the universe in the Dark Tower universe that like kind of flirts with and comes in to fuck with things in different universes and different timelines. Randall Flagg from not The Shining. What's the End of the World one where the virus is released from the military base? They remade it with Whoopi Goldberg like really recently.
The Stand?
The Stand, thank you.
Okay,
The Stand.
I was like, The Stand?
Yeah, Randall Flagg from The Stand is another like reoccurring. Randall Flagg is a bad guy in the Dark Tower books, so I always liked all that stuff. I thought it was pretty dope the way that it was all mixed in, and then like these guys said, I really like the monster and creature features. I think we've kind of gone over all of that stuff in pretty good detail.
There we go. I finally remembered the name of the one I like. I know a bunch of people don't like it, but I like Cloverfield.
Oh yeah,
Cloverfield's good.
Oh,
Cloverfield's
any
very good.
mockumentary like that, I'm about.
Yeah, I really like the Cloverfield.
So Ryan, did you like Underwater?
I did like Underwater until a certain point, and I'm actually going to bring it up as a use case in the episode. Okay. So, but yeah, the
second you said Cthulhu, I was like, I want your opinion of this.
Now that Tom said it,
you'll get my opinion.
I do like the mockumentaries because I liked Quarantine as well.
Yeah, Quarantine was good. If you haven't seen the original, the ones that Quarantine's based on, watch Wreck.
Yeah, I saw
good. So good.
I saw a summary of it where the dude puts the movie on, speed play and talks through it, and he was like, if you've seen Quarantine, this is gonna look like a shot for shot remake. Turns out this one came out first.
Yeah, Wreck is way better.
And the Wreck movies the Wreck movies ratchet fucking up. By like Wreck 3 or 4, they're on a cargo ship. Like the entire movie takes place on a cargo ship, and there's some brutal fire axe kills in that.
A ship without power would just be terrifying.
With zombies.
I'm assuming that the power gets cut very early on in the movie.
It's the same. Yeah. And I think it's the second Wreck. There's a military.
Wreck 4 Apocalypse.
One of the Wreck movies, a military
good
like unit responds. Yeah, the Wreck movies are much better. Quarantine, the first Quarantine wasn't bad.
The first one was good. It was very well put together, and it had a nice, good beginning, middle, and then the like kind of spook finale at the end there.
Well, because they based the first Quarantine on the first Wreck. When they started making extra Quarantines, they started basing it on the idea rather than recreate like in that.
Oh, okay. So they used the first one, and then it was like alternate universe.
Yeah, essentially.
I have an innate fear of fire axes. I can't remember what horror movie it was, but the guy like raised it above his head and like severed his spine with the back part of the fire axe. So ever since then, I'm like, don't fuck with that.
Actually, I kind of remember that scene. I don't
remember what the movie.
It might have been replicated in something else, but I kind of remember seeing something like that and being like, oh.
Yeah.
Well, because so I mean, a bunch of kids I don't know how many other kids, but a bunch of kids, some of my friends used to dig holes as a kid for fun. And I had a pickaxe. And that was always the thing, is like, bring it up, but don't bring it up too far because you're going to hit yourself in the back. And so, like,
I've hit myself in the head with axes. I've hit myself in the head with fucking sledgehammers, all sorts of things working outside.
yeah, I mean, you expect to hit
It's
yourself
usually
in the
not
hand with a hammer. You don't expect for it to. I know. But that's what I'm saying is you expect for it to like miss the nail or bounce off the nail, hit yourself in the finger, and like that's gonna suck. Like we all know that is like an expected experience. Like you're full well accepting that's gonna happen. What you don't expect is for it to bounce off the nail and hit you in the forehead.
Yeah, it usually doesn't hurt that much though, because your body like does everything you can to slow it down. But yeah,
it reacts.
It can be
that it's
way worse.
Yeah, your body is amazing at seeing things like that before you even have time, and it reacts for you. But it's more that it like that surprise ow, like ow, what the fuck?
What did I just do?
What?
To get back to link back a little bit with Beast's choices, my favorite monster is the werewolf. I don't really think a lot of movies do him justice though. Dog Soldiers is one of them. I really like the werewolves in Underworld and the way that they operate in Underworld, but I don't know if I like
tropes.
Yeah, I don't know if I like the movies. I mean, they're watchable.
I like the vampires. I like the werewolves. I don't buy their whole like main plot line necessarily.
Yeah, exactly.
It was just they just wanted Masquerade to be a movie.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of it.
Which
makes a lot of sense if you look at all the people that made it, considering a bunch of them play vampire. But anyway,
do they really?
Oh yeah, Kate Beckinsale plays vampire.
No way.
Yeah.
Of course she does. Dude, look at her. Look at her in that movie. She's like, the whole time in that movie, she's like, I'm my best self.
Yeah. I thought she just like felt like she was always born to be a hot goth vampire princess.
Well, so that's the dirty little secret about most actors. Most actors are super into role playing and all this fantasy shit because guess what?
That's what they play.
Acting. Yeah, it's literally their job. We see them as being like these like rock star not jocks, but they're not. Even rock stars aren't really that jockey. It's very interesting how we perceive celebrities because celebrities are not the cool kids in high school. They're not. Yeah, they really aren't.
Yeah.
Unless they only date 25-year-olds until they turn 25 and then they date another one.
I feel like some of them, like
had to take
Harrison
a pop
Ford
shot
was probably a jock.
You leave.
He was a stoner.
Oh yeah.
Harrison Ford was a stoner and a carpenter. He ended up an actor on accident.
Yeah, and it's clear as day every time you have an interview with him. He's just like,
oh, what?
Wait, how did I get here? Yeah. One of my favorite things ever is they were interviewing, I can't remember who they were interviewing, but they were interviewing somebody that worked on the Star Wars films. And they're like, yeah, so Harrison Ford one day, he gets picked up by the cabbie in London. And he had run out of rolling papers. So he had literally taken a cast iron pot and put all of his pot in it and then put it on the stove. So he's in the back of the cab with this cast iron pot and he keeps pulling the lid off and going out of it and putting the lid back on, like as they're driving to the set for either Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. It's like, I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Like only in the fucking 80s would that happen. But yeah, so from a science fiction edge, since that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about moving forward here, I really wanted to bring up two different book series. And the first one is the Hyperion Cantos. And the Hyperion Cantos deals with this monster called the Shrike. And it's kind of this like god that people like go to have wishes granted. But the Hyperion Cantos deals with some really, really fucked up horror elements. One of the horror elements that it deals with is there's a version of the church that exists called the Pax, and I can't remember what Pax stands for, but they found this creature that looks like a cross. And if it melds into your body, it keeps you from dying. Like it resurrects you. But every time you resurrect, you're a little bit more fucked up. Like you can never die and you're a little bit more fucked up. So this one priest, in order to like stop the symbiote from taking over his body, puts himself into this fire forest. So it's a forest that's main component is like every 24 hours or every 36 hours or something, the entire forest erupts into fire and everything in it burns that isn't the trees. So this priest is just slowly getting immolated over and over and over again because he can't figure out how to die.
Almost sounds like Lazarus Pit with Ra's al Ghul and Batman.
Lazarus Pit.
Yeah, it's like the what do you call it? It's the elixir of life or whatever it is. He like bathes in it. You eventually come back to life, but you're like insane or slowly like more insane.
You're a little bit more fucked up each time you come back, essentially. But yeah, it's a really interesting series of books. It was written by an author named Dan Simmons. He also wrote another 2 books that are basically the Iliad and the Odyssey, but they're in the sci-fi. They're set in a sci-fi setting, and in this sci-fi setting, it's long enough in the future that humans colonized Mars and a bunch of other planets, and then humanity split into humans that have so much technology they're indistinguishable from gods. And they've remade themselves as the Roman gods on Olympus Mons on Mars. And then the other split of humanity are humans that still live on Earth. And even though they have all this crazy high technology, they essentially live like farmers and peasants. And the gods fuck with them constantly. And those are very interesting. One of the guys fucks himself up so bad that he's Caliban from The Tempest, and he's like stuck in a space station fucking eating people because he's an alligator person. So Dan Simmons
suddenly warp alligator.
Suddenly warp. They just keep coming back up. The other one I wanted to bring up is The Expanse. The Expanse on its surface very much just comes across as a sci-fi setting, but if you've read it specifically, but if you get into it a lot deeper, The Expanse deals with some fucking crazy horror elements. Essentially, a lot of the stuff that we talked about last time when we were talking about like what the basis of fear is, this unknown quantity that exists outside of our understanding and how it's messing with us. So I think that brings us really well into the grimdark setting of Warhammer 40k. Not only does the grimdark setting have its foundations in horror, but it's a great setting to write your own horror stories in. Whether you sit down to flesh out a death world, want to lay out a full RPG campaign, or just want to work on lore and short fiction, there is a core of paranoia, suspense, unease, and the unknowable that runs throughout this entire universe. Superstition, fear, violence, and the grind of endless war casts a glow on every living soul, human and Xenos alike, like the guttering, sickly yellow light of a candle burned one too many times.
The scions of the Dark City would never admit that the unceasing hunger at their core is what drives them to such heights of cruelty. Instead, they maintain that they act only upon their own desires. Some even managed to convince themselves of this. In truth, unless our cousins in the webway feed upon a constant diet of extreme emotion, they will slowly wither away, leaving naught but a soulless husk. We of the craft worlds deny all such urges, and in doing so become less than ourselves. Perhaps it is those that we left to perish are the lucky ones.
So that was the Spirit Seer Ayana Ereniel.
She has a deep voice.
She does. So getting started in horror writing, a lot like we did with the last episode, or not the last episode, but the last episode where we gave you creative writing tips rather than just kind of explored creative writing in general. We have 5 tips and tricks to writing horror and creating suspense throughout stories. These are: write what you know, keep a close perspective, leveraging fear, work within established rules, don't lose sight of your story. So first off, we have write what you know. Fear is a very basic and a very primal emotion, in so much as that some people will even refute that fear is an emotion. And one of those weird things that only seems to happen late on in high school, I had been given an assignment at one point. It was one of those group assignments where we had to essentially do a paper and presentation on an emotion. And because it was high school and because all this shit was mixed together, not only did we have to like write a paper, but we had to do one of those like multimedia presentations. In retrospect, I kind of understand why the teacher had us do that, especially since here I am writing and presenting creative writing tips to a podcast. But at the time, it seemed really weird, especially for an honors British literature class. A lot of the other groups in class focused on a lot of the more obvious feelings and emotions, things like love, sadness, disgust, and boredom. And being that I had already started to be involved with short productions, either on stage play or on movies with horror stuff, I was fucking around with the drama club doing fake blood effects, and I was already making fake horror movies and zombie movies with my friends. A lot of the presentation that me and my partner decided to focus on was fear. One of the super memorable examples that one of the other groups did, by the way, was on disgust. And this group brought in a bunch of weird food, at least at that time in my life, weird food. Things like cow brain dishes and living insect dishes, things that no one really wants to know what it is when they're eating it. And that's how they presented it. They gave us this food and we ate it, and then they would tell us what it was. And then you'd be like, ugh. But, you know, now as an adult, I don't know if any of that would affect me that much because I've eaten some weird shit.
Yeah, man. Tacos de cabeza. It's pretty good.
Yeah, 100%, right? Lengua. So we ended up building a video presentation to kind of exploit the fear in the room. And the way that we did this was we focused on the suspense that builds up before the attack, before a character is seen dying on screen. And we specifically never showed the deaths. We just very, very specifically focused on all of the tension building moments. The teacher, when he heard our pitch, because that was part of it, we had to pitch everything to the teacher, was like, fear is not an emotion, guys. It's too basic. It's more of a symptom of emotions rather than emotion itself. And we did it anyway. He basically said, you guys are going to have a really hard time getting a good grade. We fucking floored him because we put on this 15-minute movie that we had made that was just cuts of other movies. And this is back in like 2 VCRs, marking the times, hitting record, and like we made this tape where all we did was
you 808 mixing over there.
Yeah, right. We built all of these fear sequences on top of each other in like a 15-minute run, but we never gave the payout of the death. And because we never gave the payout of the death, there was never a release. There was never a moment where everybody could like collectively have a sigh of relief. Right.
The whole time. Like you never get that like,
yep. Exactly. And at the same time, we had focused on the shit that scared the two of us. And being that we were horror heads, like the shit that scared us, like fucking freaked everybody else out really badly. And, you know, this is the time where they would turn off, you know, you do a video presentation, they turn off the lights. So while the lights were turned off, I had this, I don't have it anymore, but I had this tarantula that I had bought at a Halloween store at some point that was like the size of a dog and like a German Shepherd. And it folded up really small. But I had unfolded it and I had put it in the back of the room, and like we had done a bunch of other stuff, and like literally the lights came on and some girl turned around and screamed, and it was perfect. We 100% proved that fear was an emotion that you could like fucking tweak in people. It was beautiful.
That you can provoke with know, visual stimulus.
Right. So the point of all of that is that most of us understand fear because most of us have fears, and a lot of our fears are similar. Whether it's the fear of the unknown, the fear of death, or the fear of failure. I actually wrote a paper in college called The Fear of Success because I think that those two are really closely linked. The fear of pain or the fear of loss. These fears are things that fall back on. Those are things and fears that to fall back on when you're designing horror and even in a sci-fi setting. However, always remember, it isn't about what makes the Space Marine afraid. It should be about what makes the audience afraid. Once you fall into the trap of trying to scare the immortal rage monster, you lose sight of what makes that tension. The more the stakes are grounded in a reality of a situation that grows towards extremes, the harder it is to relate to those extremes. And eventually the audience spends more time thinking about what the fuck is going on and less about the horror that you're trying to communicate. So that's one of the things about writing what you know. The more you try to imagine what makes a Space Marine scared, the more you get away from the experience of being scary. You know, because now you're going, oh, well, they don't care about a spider, so now there has to be a 25-foot tall spider with 77 legs and 26 and then people like myself and Kevin will and Kevin, I'm picking on you because I know that we think the same. We'll start picking apart how that insect can't walk, and then it falls apart. Like I'm not paying attention to how scary your monster is anymore.
I'm not scared anymore because it's just fucking ridiculous.
This is dumb, right? So unless you're writing cosmic horror, but at that point you're specifically playing with fear of the unknowable, and just like the horror classics, it's almost never a good idea to show that monster. So when you start playing with that stuff, the the Cthulhu's, the Yog Shaggoth and stuff like that, a lot of that writing and a lot of the way that those monsters is presented as is little clues. It's that Alfred Hitchcock thing. Don't show it. Show its shadow. Don't show it. Let people hear its sound. You start playing with the different senses. So as an example, I want to pick on the movie Underwater. That movie has fantastic atmospherics. It's incredibly claustrophobic, and it has a handful of truly uneasy jump scares scattered throughout. It also builds up a mountain of tension throughout the film that some great unseen horror is actually behind everything. It completely breaks the cardinal rule, though, and it shows the fucking monster. And the last 15 minutes of the movie turn into, we need to save the world, rather than we need to get out alive. And honestly, that we need to save the world completely changes the entire tone of the movie and fucking kills it. Not only that, but like, oh my God, I didn't need to see it was Cthulhu. You established it was Cthulhu. Why the fuck did you show me Cthulhu? You've fucking broken the movie. They broke the movie in the last 15 minutes for me. It pissed me off a lot.
See, I think they broke it when they showed the first monster part.
The one that rips him underwater?
The frog dudes. When it showed them, I was over it.
Yeah, it all happens in like that last 50. They showed them and they show them like going to the surface and they're like, we need to save the world. And then you see Cthulhu and I'm like, this is over. It was good until they showed monsters.
Yeah.
Like, literally.
Blair Witch really captured that and didn't ruin the
100%.
original. The new one, I believe they show the witch towards the end of the movie. And
that one's still scary though.
For a glimpse. Yeah. And that can work out. In fact, in contrast, on the other side, we have The Thing. And The Thing is such a masterclass of horror because although you see the monsters constantly, what makes them up is unknowable in the extreme. It's very hard to grasp what you're looking at. Not only that, but the stakes are incredibly fucking simple. It all becomes about, can McReady get out alive? There's nothing about saving the world. There's nothing about stopping it. There's literally, there is stopping it. Can I stop it and survive? And it's not even a long-term survival. It's a hopeless survival. And that, it's better. It's way better.
A lot of that can actually be applied to Tremors. Now that I think back, like we talk about it, I'm like,
don't let it get out of this valley.
Don't let it get out of the valley. Like they established that it couldn't leave the valley, but that they're stuck in the valley. Like, and then like you said, the Alfred Hitchcock thing, don't show it, show what it can do, show its sound. Like you don't see the monster, you see the little tentacled things and it turns out the monster's way bigger, but you always knew that. You're like, those things that's not really the monster.
Right.
And then eventually when you do see it, it's fucking huge.
Do you I'm assuming you've seen it, but there was this one movie, it was the STD horror where they would
Cabin Fever?
No. You would sleep with someone.
It follows.
It follows, yeah. And essentially it's that unknowing fear of like, is that the person that's gonna kill me kind of thing? It follows. Yeah, it was bad, but the idea was like gnarly. Like
it's a pretty. I would rewatch it. It's a pretty freaky film. Like it's silly if you think about it too much, but the thing that chases the girl throughout the entire fucking film doesn't run.
Yep.
Like it's one of those things where like you could outrun it. You could get on an airplane. You could run to the airport. You could buy an airplane. You could get on an airplane. You could fly to a different country. The thing that's scary about the monster in It Follows is it just fucking follows. It will eventually catch up to you.
Yeah.
And it'll eventually take you.
I think there was like a meme or something where it's like, would you rather have, or like, would you accept the idea of taking $1 million, but
there's a snail that's trying to kill you or whatever?
Snail that is following you forever, and if that snail ever touches you, you die. It's would you accept that? And it's like people are like, yeah, I put the snail in a jar, and then I'd take the $1 million and I just live a happy life. And it's like, well, what if that jar breaks?
Did you ever see the other one?
The chance is never zero.
Did you ever see It? Not It Follows. Happy Death Day to You. That's another one that's got like a really silly premise. Like if you think about it. So Happy Death Day to You is essentially Groundhog Day, except when the girl dies, when the main actress dies, she wakes up again. And then she basically goes through her day again, trying to like figure out how not to die. And it's you should, if you haven't seen Happy Death Day to You, you should watch it because it's pretty. And I think it takes place on her birthday. That's why that's the happy.
I think they had a supernatural episode like that where essentially a guy was stuck inside of a loop. One of the main characters, I think Dean, he was stuck in a loop because Loki put him in a constant death loop, and he would just die every day. And it happened for like a long period of time where he would like go crazy. He went crazy or some shit like that. It was an interesting episode, but I think it's the same premise.
Yeah, it's always interesting when they do shit like that because it's different. It's a different take on things.
There's a couple movies out there that are what you're talking about, where like the suspense stays there, where they don't ever show the thing, but they do all the time.
Right.
The Ruins.
The Ruins is a good one.
Splinter is actually one. It was like sci-fi original back in the day, and Splinter is really good for having that because it's like you see what it is, but you never know what it is. You know.
Right.
And just like Ruins too, like the plants, you know, like
dude, the Ruins is such a good film.
Yeah. I've kind of seen this one too.
It's good.
And Splinter, I really like this one. Splinter starts in a gas station kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Splinter's really good. I like that one.
So the next one is to keep a close perspective. So horror and suspense work best when they're relatable. Jumping into a cold opening where several hundred people are dead already doesn't do as much for establishing the cost of the story. We aren't saying that you can't still start there. You just have stacked a deck against yourself, and you're going to have to do a lot more work by showing the results of that high stake really early in the story. H.P. Lovecraft, Stephen King, and Dean Koontz all established very plausible scenarios before peeling back layer after layer of their world building to layer in the unease in you. In a stereotypical Lovecraftian story, the established baseline is often something mundane, if not outright boring. Some archaic principle of academia, the narrator often goes to length to describe a taxonomy or the use of some other form of scientific method. They establish the fact that this is a boring dude. This is a librarian. Nothing bad ever happens to a librarian. In Stephen King's cases, his fictional universe often deals with Maine, and it's very much the picturesque realization of the 1950s nuclear family society. There's white picket fences, there's brick buildings, there's a main street that has these quaintly reminiscent stores of our grandparents' era. Everything is that picturesque Norman Rockwell version of American society at the beginning of a Stephen King book. Dean Koontz, similarly to King, utilizes similar reflections of our very modern real world, where there might be a conversation about gas prices happening on a talk show radio while two characters are driving somewhere, or there's a string of armed robberies that have local police stumped in the area. Again, it starts out with these very recognizable things. In an extreme version, even Anne Rice, who broke a lot of the rules that I just talked about with Interview with the Vampire, still sets out the story in the confines of the mundane. Sure, the person talking is an immortal killer, but he's chosen to speak to a run-of-the-mill reporter, and he's doing it in a simple postmodern office setting. You know, it's not a crazy Victorian mansion. It's not a room filled with skinned corpses hanging from the ceiling. Literally, he's talking to this dude in a fucking office building. In all of these cases, the author is using something relatable, something that grounds us, the audience, in an almost comfortable setting. And because we're comfortable and because we understand those rules, the horror that gets layered in on top of it is that much worse. In the case of writing speculative fiction of sci-fi and fantasy, like stories set in the Warhammer 40,000 world, we just shift to find what is relatable, or we build rule sets that we can use to be relatable. As an example, the Eisenhorn novels rely on the understood template of the detective noir story. While people might say, why is everybody obsessed with true crime nowadays? I hear that a lot, like, oh, you kids are obsessed with true crime nowadays. We've really been into this shit for fucking 200 years. Wild West dime novels, fucking police procedurals like Law and Order and CSI, all of this shit that has given our entire society, modern society, this like love for the detective police procedural. This shit is ingrained in us. It's an understood rule set. So Dan Abnett is utilizing that shit to put us into a place where we can relate to Eisenhorn, because Eisenhorn is just a space cop. We're given the elements of his case, normally being introduced to the case at the same time that the heroes are. So at the same time Eisenhorn and his team are. They don't know things we don't know. They're finding it out as we find it out. And tensions are wrapped up as the stakes get higher and higher and higher. Will the bad guys get away with it? Will our heroes die trying to stop them? Will they fail but survive, dooming an entire city or planet? We see the fears expressed as these stakes are established, and while there may be a laser pistol and fusion engines in the background, there's a backdrop of normal behind all of it that makes sense to us as well. People work everyday jobs, often in very working class conditions, suffering from things like poverty, crime, and weather conditions that we identify with in our modern lives. We all know what having a shitty job is like. We all know what crime is like. We all know what fucking assholic weather is like, especially that turns on a dime. In cases where things might be a little more removed from the relatable, Abnett does take time to establish the rules of the Ordos and the steps that an inquisitor takes in the prosecution of their duties, grounding the hunt for a dangerous disembodied heretic in the mundanity of things like paperwork, bureaucratic rivalries, and the political landscape of local authorities battling for crime scene permission. So even though Abnett's chasing this disembodied dude who wants to resurrect himself, he hits these fucking roadblocks that make sense to us. The disembodied dude trying to resurrect, it's a little far-fetched. The police arguing with the Inquisition about whether or not they're going to release the crime scene makes sense. We see it in the news every day. Always remember that humans in the 42nd millennium still drink coffee, eat food, lust after one another, engage in all sorts of stupid small talk, and are willing to bend or break the law in order to make a quick throne or three.
I've never really been like the NCIS kind of guy. I do, like, even X-Files is probably as far as I go into it.
Yeah, I'd be the same.
But you understand it. That the point is not you like it. The point is you understand it.
Right.
I would say, actually, I mean, it's super mainstream, but Star Wars does a pretty good job with those scenes as well. There's always like a bar scene or something, and it always gets you like immersed. Like it's they always include those immersion scenes, spaceports with background, bing, transport arriving, landing pad 3. There's always, they always throw those in as good transitional scenes, which kind of like keep you like, okay, this is a functioning world. Like this is a transport hub. I don't know what any of these ships are called, but I understand the premise of what's going on here because all the context clues are given to me.
This is a really fancy bus station.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Star Trek does pretty good with that too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
Like the mess hall on the ship is clearly a mess hall. Like it's very recognizably, like exactly what that is. Bridge is obviously the bridge.
My experience there and thoughts are lacking in that field.
But I mean, like, even if it's just you've seen the show Cops before, like we as a society kind of just understand how like crime is looked at. It's too big. It's really funny because like every once in a while I'll hear some fucking like person disparaging upon our generation, our collective generation, or people younger than them be like, I don't understand why kids these days are super into this shit. And I'll be like, because you were. That's why you fucking raised us with this entertainment. It's your goddamn fault. None of this is new. Like when people bitch about
Jag.
Yeah, when people bitch about people being on their phones, like I can't believe all these kids on their phones on the subway. Fucking 10, 15 years ago, you guys were reading newspapers and books on the subway and ignoring each other. There's no difference.
Yep.
That's a valid point.
The other side of this is people in those stories. It's easier to build suspense and spring the trappings of a good horror twist if your characters are also extremely relatable. While in certain circumstances you can have a massively muscled hero, like those in the original Predator, meet their demise one by one throughout the horror of the film, most often those types of stories play out more like action versus the true horror side of the genre. Again, it's action horror. They also are playing with the well-established tropes of their era. We understood, or we understand, the stakes of those heroes because the genre of films that surrounds them made all of those actors icons before Predator came out. We understood the Arnold Schwarzenegger archetypical hero when Predator came out, which allowed us to have a set of rules which helped us identify the odds these guys were against. In contrast, however, Ripley, Dallas, and the crew of the Nostromo are much more relatable characters, even though they're in a crazy science fiction setting. They're working a shitty 9-to-5 job in conditions that don't really let them go home. They have no time away from work. They live on the fucking ship. They have shitty failing equipment. They have little to no ongoing support. And, oh yeah, the boss can just interrupt whatever they're doing last minute and give them a new task, like going to an alien fucking world and picking up a thing. The horror of Alien steps in as hard as it does because most of us understand and connect with the lives of those characters, even though there's a huge lens of sci-fi trappings. The movie Alien is filled with sci-fi background stuff, but all of us understand how shitty it is to be a space trucker. Another example of this is the monster film Feast. Some unknowable monsters lay siege to a small edge-of-the-desert bar. The bar is full of your average slice-of-life characters, from the bar staff to a couple of after-work buddies playing pool, and even a biker character, the Drifter and Outsider, who's a very relatable female character because we don't really know whether or not she's hard or wants to appear hard. She's that kind of stereotypical biker, which we all understand. We understand those tropes because they exist a lot of ways. By the way, Jason Mewes is one of the two guys that's playing pool, and he gets his face ripped off in the movie, if you haven't seen it. In a great sequence, after they've boarded up the bar and a few people inside the bar have actually already died, so the film has established the stakes, 2 new characters arrive. It's probably important to mention that the characters are introduced with the flash frame and text. So this was way before the movie Suicide Squad had come out, but that whole like freeze frame and then they give the character's name and a bunch of stats. Feast did this like 2002, 2003 when the film came out.
Oh yeah, that wasn't new for Suicide Squad, but
no,
it was. I thought it was.
I gotta check that one out. I love Jason Mewes and
Feast is fucking great, dude.
But like, I dig the whole idea of like, it's almost like a what you would do in that situation or being relatable to that character. It's funny because this scene kind of reminds me of the one with Obi-Wan when that was the death stick dealer guy in the bar. You want some death sticks, and he's just like, you don't want to
give me
You want to go home and rethink your life.
I want to go home and rethink my life. So these flash frames come up and they introduce stuff. So it'll often give the name of the character. It gives some facts about them. Plus, it actually gives an estimation of how long they're going to survive until they die. Because the movie, as where it's a good horror movie, it's also kind of taken the piss out of horror movies, which is fun.
Yeah.
So these 2 new characters are introduced literally as the hero, who will probably survive until the end of the film, and the hero's girlfriend, who will probably die next. The guy hero is a pretty standard 30-something looking dude. He's in jeans and a t-shirt. He's got a shotgun. The horror movie basic survivor type. The guy that you look at in a horror movie and go, yep, he's going to live. He lands in the bar. He jumps through a window, knocks a support out. The shutter falls in front of the window, and then he leans back against the shutter. No sooner than his girlfriend comes through next to him and her title card comes up. Camera goes back to him. The shutter behind him bursts open, and the monster comes in and bites his entire upper torso off.
Wrecked.
It immediately prompts the girlfriend to flash frame again. It gives her name, lists her as the actual hero, and then says probably the person who will survive until the end of the film. Again, she's pretty. She's a 30-something, and she's a very stereotypical girl next door type. She's not blonde, and she's not the big-chested final girl of most of the genre. She's just kind of an interesting person, a person you can relate to really easily. The entire sequence is brilliant as it does a lot of heavy lifting. It introduces 2 barely surviving every-person characters. You can identify with their run through the desert, the way they look, and the actions that they've taken, and it then establishes the stakes by killing the character that we identify through years of watching horror films and being invested in stories. Really, it's not even horror films, it's just stories in general, films in general. They give you this is the dude that looks like he's most likely to survive. They tell you he's most likely to survive, and then they immediately kill him. And they switch to a female lead. All of those things are done to put the watcher, us, into the shoes of someone who also just happens to be stranded at that bar. So as before that point in the movie, you're watching these people's lives. As soon as that shit happens, now you're invested. Now you're immersed. Now you're like, wait, I could die here too. There's also the first-person shooter formula, establishing a main character that is bland and as unidentifiable or as identifiable as possible, so the reader or the audience can very easily slip into their shoes. This works more in the first-person narrative, where the eyes we experience the events through can become a template for us, the reader. As another example, or as an example that isn't from the literary world, Gordon Freeman from Half-Life is a very good example, as he's presented as a run-of-the-mill, if not completely unspectacular, working scientist who just happens to be in the wrong place at the right time. Freeman also barely has any spoken parts in the narrative, so we mostly experience things as he experiences them. And the reason that they do that in first-person shooter video games, the reason that this is a very big trope in first-person shooter video games, is it helps us immerse. The fact that the character doesn't talk makes us feel like the character, because then the things that we're saying and the things we're thinking become a template cast upon the character.
Yeah, what was the what the hell is the name of that movie? It's like the literal sense of what we're talking about right now.
Hardcore Henry.
Yep, that's the one.
The first person one. Yeah,
I liked it.
Oh, I love it.
It's not necessarily. It's done a lot in books and it's done a lot in video games because it's a lot easier to do in both of those cases because first person narrative works well. It's not really something that's happened a lot except for Hardcore Henry. That's really happened in films.
Now that
films that have a heavy narrator, a lot of romantic movies will do it actually.
Now that you
because
brought
you
up,
can have like monologue-y. Go ahead. Sorry.
Now that you brought up Half-Life with Gordon Freeman, that has a bunch of good horror aspects too.
Oh, it does.
As far as video games go, that aren't supposed to be straight up horror. The whole Ravenholm head crab levels are all super scary. But then, even in general, like the whole Combine, and otherworldly portals and everything like that is pretty good.
Yeah, it's a super spooky concept, and it's done in a way where immersion is the point. Immersion is the point of a
you feel like
shooter.
You're in this world that's being invaded by aliens.
Right. So from a literary standpoint, in The Shadow over Innsmouth, the narrator is never named, and throughout the book, you read mostly his internal monologue. We only get hints of what makes the character or the narrator a character in and of himself. We get that they have time to kill and are interested in local history. They're in a transitioning from one stage of life to another. In this case, I believe they're starting college soon. And they're curious as to the rumors of the town of Innsmouth. The rest of the story revolves around the first person's narration of that person's experience. We only get their thoughts and experiences, and they're all delivered through the mechanism of I see, I feel, I think, I smell, binding us closer and closer to becoming the person experiencing these events ourselves. In general, horror and suspense are best through one of two methods, first person or third person limited narrative. And often it's useful to play with the concept of unreliable narration, where the very sense or maybe the sanity of the people involved can and do become questioned very early in the story. This type perspective on the story helps to contain and reinforce the claustrophobic nature that makes everybody uneasy. We're really only dealing with one person's outlook or a limited group of people's outlooks. It also stops you from going too much into exposition, which drags the audience out of the experience when they need to be immersed in the experience to build that tension. Unreliable narrator is a huge thing. It's used in a lot of horror stuff. H.P. Lovecraft uses it a lot. The whole idea that the people that are naming these things, actually Stephen King uses it a lot. Anybody who tells a story from the perspectives of a tight clustered group of characters where those experiences can be questioned, or whether or not they're seeing things, or whether or not they're crazy, or whether or not they're lying, comes into question, it's a very good tool for writing short story or stories in general. You guys have any closing
Oh.
thoughts on keeping a close perspective? Sorry, Mark.
No, you're good. I was going to say, was it kind of an example of that? Like having all those
Yes.
different,
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, you get a bunch of different perspectives of a bunch of different characters, and you have to kind of play them off each other and leverage what's true or not. And then I think it's Mikey specifically lies to the rest of the group, especially in part 2 of the new movies anyway, because he doesn't tell them the entire ritual. He only tells them the part of the ritual that he wants them to agree to.
Yeah.
So that's all unreliable narrator.
Okay.
So the next tip that we have is leveraging fear. So the first part of leveraging fear is establishing the stakes. We've already mentioned that a few times up to this point, and it's a core rule for creative writing in general, but at some point early on, you have to establish the stakes on which to build the suspense and tension. Fear of death or fear of destruction are common stakes in sci-fi and fantasy genres. Fear of death is what drives the protagonist of a zombie survival story, and often not just death, but a really painful death. And fear of destruction is what drives stories that focus on a wider outlook, such as needing to destroy a ring of power to save the world from an age of darkness. In general, the conflict of a story normally falls into one of 7 categories: character versus character, character versus society, character versus nature, character versus technology, character versus the supernatural, character versus fate, or character versus self. Each of these can be used to establish the baseline stakes needed for tension building. As an example, in At the Mountains of Madness, Lovecraft builds the tension by establishing the conflict of character versus nature early on, as the expedition is set in Antarctica. The stakes are now how to balance the potential for scientific discovery with the very real threat of death by exposure. However, as easy as death and destruction are to pull off the shelf, madness, loss, and grief can be just as potent or powerful. To return to the Yep.
I was just going to add one of my favorite books, Mountain Man, essentially adds a lot of these conflicts in the story, which made me like it a lot. Like character versus character. At some point, he's essentially having to face off against his brother.
Right.
His brother's essentially like not a warmonger. What do you call it? He's a
So what now?
Yeah, right. He essentially created like a big tribe, and he's like in charge of that tribe.
Like a warlord.
Warlord, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. And then like character versus society, he's having to deal with other looters within the city that are taking the same resources that he's looting as well. Character versus nature, he's living up on a mountain. It's snowing. Like there's fucking animals and shit. Not so much character versus technology, unless you want to go with like weapons and stuff and such. At one point, he gets like a Benelli and he has like Sabo rounds and shit. It was pretty funny.
So character versus technology can be character versus advanced technology or character versus lack of technology. It can be either way. You know, you're expecting
technology.
You're expecting a cell phone and you don't have a cell phone anymore. That's character versus technology, just as much as your cell phone grows legs and bites you.
Yeah. Oh, that. Well, in that sense, like on the mountain, he essentially had like a fortress where it was like he had, what the fuck was it called? He had solar power or solar panels with like batteries, and like he had like this gnarly like home entertainment setup that he would just essentially like veg out every day and watch movies and stuff based off of this when there's no power on the grid and whatnot. Character versus fate, obviously that's a pretty typical thing, you know, like what is the fate of this man and how is he going to go out like moving forward. And then character versus self, he's essentially an alcoholic. That's how he deals with having to fight zombies constantly. So after every time he loots, he just gets blackout drunk.
Not gonna lie, I kind of identify with this character a little bit.
Dude, it is amazing. Like every time he gets home, he's like, well, fucking. That's where I got the whole loot thing from. Like,
have you ever watched Black Summer?
No.
I think I started watching part of it.
Yeah, so there's a series called Z Nation, which is kind of like a silly take on zombie.
I love
horror.
it though. It's good.
I've watched Black Summer. I've watched all of it.
Z Nation is a while after the apocalypse has happened. Black Summer is the apocalypse happening. They're the same. They're a shared universe. But Black
it's like
Summer,
the prequel. Yeah.
watch, if you haven't watched all of it, Mark, watch more of it because it sounds a lot like this book.
Okay, yeah, but it's like this
cool.
guy. The reason I like it so much is because he's so relatable. He's like, I get home and he's like, I scratch my sack. I'm gonna go grab myself a handle right now and just get blackout drunk because all these fucking Zeds have been fucking with me all day. Like,
yeah,
I'm just gonna go watch Shrek and pass the fuck out. He's like, I woke up the next day and my throat was dry. I had a yak over the side of the mountain. But it was just funny because it's like super I don't want to say like masculine, but it's super like he's like the dude essentially.
The dude.
And that actually kind of works because just as death and destruction are super easy to grab, madness, loss, and grief are just as potent. And this is a character obviously going through madness, loss, and grief all at the same time. He's trying to process loss and grief, and it's I'm assuming by what you've laid out, it's kind of driving him nuts.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's just as much of a personal battle as it is like fighting zombies, survival, like all the.
You should watch that Civil War zombie movie I was telling you about, Exit Humanity. It's great. Dude, Civil War zombie movie.
Right? I read a book called 99 Coffins that was Civil War vampires, by the way.
Oh, that's cool.
So, but this one is like the dude's like, he's trying to come back from war, wife and daughter killed, and it's, him trying to like make it, and like this stuff.
Is that a TV show or is it a movie?
It's a movie.
Oh,
the movie. Nice.
Yeah,
I'm gonna check that out. It actually kind of looks interesting.
That's the list.
Yeah. No, I've talked about it to you guys in the past. It's a really good movie. I think it's on Amazon right now for free.
Nice. I'm gonna check it out.
Actually, now that you meant like that battle against yourself, like your own like going crazy like that. That's actually a thing in one of the zombie games that I think we talked about in a previous episode, Project Zomboid. It's super hard. Like the survival is so hardcore that like you can just go insane and then it'll give you a game over screen.
Well, that's we were playing a modded DayZ not too long ago. That one where we had the PDF things on our thing, where we had to sleep and all that. Yeah. There was an insanity meter. The more zombies you kill, like the more fucked you kill them. Yeah, the more insanity you have.
Oh, nice. That's cool.
Awesome. Lots of good stories, lots of good experiences layer these. And the same example at the Mountains of Madness, you get the character versus character later as he starts to question whether or not the people around him are sane and whether or not they're going to kill him. And then you get character versus supernatural when the narrator encounters the city on the other side of the mountains, which is the city of the old ones. And it even proposes the idea of the character versus himself as you start to wonder whether or not the narrator is sane or reliable. So a lot of these stories, a lot of good stories are going to layer those on top of each other, or they're going to play with multiple different versions of them essentially. But they're really core, and it's, you can identify it in Star Trek, Star Wars, all the stuff we brought up. But the Mountain Man book, it definitely sounds like it exemplifies a lot of it too, which is awesome. It's always better to have multifaceted stuff. So the next thing in leveraging fear is knowing how and when to use gore. Small moments of violence and a focus on the unseen or unknown are often much more potent than an all-out slaughter fest. However, you also have to get a sense of when to do a full slaughter to break the tension and to allow that reset. Part of this goes back to establishing the stakes. If small moments of violence continue to happen, but no one dies, the stakes have no meaning. This can actually be a huge struggle when running a horror-themed role-playing game, as often game masters don't want to kill a player character. However, if death is never the consequence of risks, is there really depth to the finality of the risk that they're taking in a horror setting? In much the same way off-screen or hinted at deaths and violence can help to build tension, it also leaves a lot of unknowns. Finally confirming an unknown allows for a release of the tension that places the audience in a place to have that tension ratcheted up once again. However, unlike when they started, they're going to be at just a slightly higher level. Even though you've released that tension, they're not going all the way back down to baseline. They're coming back from that peak, but they're cresting low. They're cresting higher. And the more that you do that, the higher you can get them to crest. And you basically kind of chase that curve without going into the ridiculous, which is the hard part. So in Alien,
so what you're saying is it's edging.
It's edging, yeah. So in Alien, a lot of the tension and what ifs are slowly established before we ever see an on-screen death. And that death not only shatters the mounting tension, but establishes that nothing is safe or sacred, as the death also happens to happen at the dinner table. That first death's fucking brutal, and it breaks the idea that there is a safe place on that ship. Slaughters do have a place, as they can be used to establish the extreme conclusion of failure to secure the established stakes, or they can be used to define a consequence of action or inaction. As an example, the Jukari are known for their wanton violence, as exemplified by this quote: "I will never forget what I saw on Obsidian Station. The bones of 5,000 brave men lay scattered about the winding corridors. Their blood was slick upon the walls and floors of the dormitories. Their innards were hung from the control panels like grotesque decorations of some insane celebration. But not a single skull was to be found, taken as sick trophies by these despicable attackers." That was Inquisitor Absolvus. I wonder if he absolves us from things. That's from the 3rd edition Dark Eldar Codex. In order to understand the horrors that might happen, we need the context of a slaughter that has happened. Another example of this is the horror of a planet being converted molecule by molecule into biomass that the Tyranids can simply drink. But this is a balance. The horror of it happening to a planet while you're on the planet is very hard to understand. It's much more easy to understand the horror that it might happen to your planet eventually. The moment of the slaughter can become too abstract, but the threat of the slaughter can remain grounded and scary, essentially. There's also a lot of focus on the slow boil. Horror excels with varied description. "Oh no, he's dead" is very short and final. This isn't much of a punch because it's just happened. Nothing has grounded us in the moment or the atmosphere of the situation. Movies will do a lot towards this. They'll build up tension with music. They'll do scenery. They kind of show what's happening. They slowly build within you an anticipation of what you may or may not see. Authors, on the other hand, often use metaphors designed to make an audience unsettled and intrigued at the same time. The descriptions need to drive a purpose, though, and not lose the reader. As an example, there's plenty of authors who go into far more fucking detail and use too many flowery metaphors on top of each other that get lost. There's other ones that work out really well. So the stuff of nightmares is their plain bread. They butter it with pain. They set their clocks by death watch beetles and thrive the centuries. They were men with leather ribbon whips who sweated upon the pyramids, seasoning it with other people's salt and other people's cracked hearts. They coursed Europe in the white horses of the plague. They whispered to Caesar that he was mortal. They sold daggers at half price in the Grand March sale. Some must have been lazing clowns, foot props for emperors, princes, and elliptical popes. Them, out on the road, gypsies in time. Their populations grew as the world grew, spread, and there were more delicious variety of pain to thrive on. The train put wheels under them, and here they ran down the log road out of the Gothic and Baroque, took at their wagons and coaches, the carving like medieval shrines, all of its stuff once drawn by horses, mules, or maybe men. It's Ray Bradbury, Something Wicked This Way Comes. So you get the idea that he's discussing some sort of immortal force, but he's not discussing it. He's discussing it using other imagery. And the way that the imagery is built upon it makes you want to read more. It doesn't make you lose interest. The last part of this, which we actually talked about in the first episode, is leveraging the fear of the last two parts. The first one is leveraging the fear of the unknown. Most of the stuff that we don't like has to do with the dark, the obscure things that we can't see. From a movie perspective, Hereditary is a perfect example of this. Hereditary and Midsommar actually very much play with things that are in the dark, which is really odd because Midsommar, almost none of that movie is actually in the dark, but it plays upon those fears. Marky brought up The Conjuring earlier. That also plays with a lot of the fear of what you may or may not be seeing, what may or may not be happening in the background. Humans instinctually seek out patterns. We see things where there's nothing there. And we rely on this fear more and more often, or we as writers should rely on this fear more than less. Alfred Hitchcock often is somebody who's exemplified as doing this. He had a way of showing the reaction and hinting at the monster rather than showing the monster. Pacing is the last thing that's really important in leveraging fear. And this kind of goes back to that descriptors and those descriptors that you use. You want your pacing to always keep driving it forward. A good way to look at pacing is that you're going to want these long, slow chunks of almost exposition that are designed to build tension, not designed to explain things. So you're going to set up your exposition by exploring atmospherics, not by defining your entire world. When you find yourself rereading, when you find yourself going over your template or your notes and seeing that you're defining too many things, you're screwing up, because you're not necessarily screwing up, but you're falling into a pitfall where you're not relying on that unknown and you're not relying on that tension. You're trying to over-explain. You're trying to idea bomb the person that you're talking to. It really becomes the balance of building the tension and then dumping the suspense. You want to build the tension up to something, and then you want to dump everything on the person at once. You guys have any thoughts on leveraging fear?
Just that I love it.
Yeah. Playing with fear is awesome. And fear, again, I keep picking on fear of the unknown a lot, but like madness and loss are huge to pick up too. And I think that's great that Marky brought up the Mountain Man book, because I feel like that's probably a lot of what it deals with.
I really enjoy it when they add the psych aspect of things, like, especially insanity, like what losing your mind. Like, my favorite types of stuff are when it's the fear of losing your mind. Like halfway through it, it's like, what am I doing? Like, hold on, am I imagining all of this? I was writing a screenplay, like a script for a short horror film, and a big chunk of like one of the characters that I was to play and the role that I was writing about was, halfway through. God, man, it's been so long. I can't even really remember most of it. But he was trying, like, basically, like, in his mind, he was saving like his wife, but in reality, he was choking her to death. And like in his mind, he's like holding her and like trying to like what is it? Like make sure she's breathing. Right. 'Cause in his mind, she was hurt. And he was like trying to wake her up, and in reality, it was the complete opposite. Like she was screaming, and he was choking her to death. And then like afterwards, like he realizes like everything kind of melts around him.
Yeah.
And like that fear, like there was a lot of build up for this. Like this was like a climax. But I like a lot of things like that where it's mental. It's very much like, am I actually seeing this? Am I not? There was a horror movie that came out recently that was called Malignant. And it's super dumb. Like it's a really stupid movie.
We talked about it in the first part of this, actually.
Yeah, like I liked the aspect where it was like she'd see something and like see a person and then like, fall asleep, wake up, and then like in her mind everything changes. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like I like that a lot. Like I like that type of that fear. To me is what's really scary, is when your reality is changing.
Yeah. Have you guys ever seen The Boy?
I don't think so.
So The Boy is a film where this like gal gets a job to like watch this house, and in the house there's this porcelain doll called the Boy, and the Boy,
I've heard of that actually.
Like,
yes,
like he ends
like,
up in different places, and like she doesn't know
it's
how he's moving.
He's like a real boy or something, like in prison.
There's a dude living in the walls of the house that's fucking with her the entire time, but it's that whole idea.
Shit.
It plays with your like perception of what's going on.
That's ooh.
Dude, isn't that like this is one that my mom used to watch. What was it? The Kids in the Attic? The Kids in the Attic?
Kids Under the Stairs.
Is that what it was? But essentially, like there was like a bunch of kids that like lived in the walls and whatnot. I thought it was Kids in the Attic.
Yeah, and there was one of them who had his tongue cut off, and he was helping
the
like the other one.
The Kids in the Hall and Kids in the Attic are,
yeah.
I think, are
there's another one
comedy troupes.
There's another one kind of like that. That's like a kind of poltergeist.
People Under the Stairs.
Fuck, what was it called?
Yeah, I remember that one.
I mean, I guess I'll just give you guys the spoilers so it's the plot line.
Most of these movies came out like 10 plus years ago, guys.
So the plot line is these people live in a house and they're, living their lives in this house, and then they think that all of a sudden they've been invaded by ghosts.
Oh, The Others.
The Others, yeah.
With Nicole Kidman.
Nicole Kidman. Yeah. That was a good one.
Yeah.
I totally blanked on that until just now with this whole conversation. That's a
fucking amazing horror twist. Yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
Flowers in the Attic, I think is what it was called.
Flowers in the Attic. Oh, I know. Okay, I know yeah. That's kind of funny because I immediately thought The People Under the Stairs, but I know the movie you're talking about.
You got it, but I don't think Mark or Tom has seen The Others because they didn't really seem to react. But
no, I've heard. I never watched it, but I definitely heard of it.
Okay, so the spoilers is it turns out that the main characters are the ghosts.
Yeah, they're the dead people.
They're the
people
dead
that
people.
moved into their house are the people who bought the house.
Are the real people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I remember watching that. It was like the whole joke. It was like, oh my god, Sixth Sense Family Edition. Like, that was the joke. Like,
it's a freaky...
Sixth Sense meets Full House. Like,
right.
It is a legitimately freaky movie, though.
And she plays it well. Like, if she didn't sell the character as well as she did, then it wouldn't have been such a good movie. But
Nicole Kidman playing a crazy person? Who knew?
No shit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's like Eminem playing himself.
He's never done that. I'm just saying. So the next one that we had established was work within established rules. So what we mean by work within established rules is the stuff that we cover in Loris Obscurus. Why do myths exist? Why do we have a lot of these shared paranormal encounters? How does the anatomy of the human body work? What is physically possible? And then
science and physics. You can't forget that.
And then how can you break those rules or bend those rules? Because there are ways to bend and break those rules.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, of course, a bunch of stuff that you can pull on that everybody understands. What are the rules that we've established within a universal constant set? Like, we talked about this really early on in the podcast. Movies have a way that cars always explode when they're shot. Guns always do certain things. None of that exists except in Hollywood land, but play with that. So
right.
Slasher gore works a specific way. TV crime works a specific way. Movie weapons follow a specific set of physics. Lovecraftian mythos has its own established rules. The warp in Warhammer 40K has its own established rules. So it's playing within wherever you ground yourself. You've got to remember your roots to pull upon that
Stay attached.
Yeah. Don't lose what you're doing. And then you've got to know, once you've decided all of that, we talked about this already with the physical side of it, with the way that the human body works and the way that the human body physically reacts. But any rule that you pick, whether it's a mythos-based rule, a physics-based rule, or a genre-based rule, you then need to know how to push and bend and break those rules. And the big part about that is that you don't actually have to know the trick. The trick is, once you've broken the rule, you need to stick to the fact that that rule can be broken in your universe. You never want to go to a place where, really great example, Final Fantasy Advent Children, Cloud can take his little bike and jump and fly on the walls and do spinny flips and ride it upside down and all this other bullshit, and none of the other characters can. That's breaking the rule of the universe. If Cloud can do it, everybody chasing Cloud can do it. They might not be good at it and they might crash.
Not good enough. Yeah.
Right. But the way that it happens in the film is, they just can't. That breaks it. That totally breaks it. A great example of this on the Final Fantasy side is I think Final Fantasy Kingbreaker or Oathbreaker or whatever, the one that Kingslayer. There's the dudes that if they get that special dagger, it gives them power and they can blink in and out. And there's guys that are really, really good at it. And then there's people who just pick up a dagger and fuck with it and horrible shit happens. Again.
Oh, it's kind of like Bright.
Yeah. There's a rule.
Yeah.
Are you good at the rule or are you bad at the rule? There's a rule that establishes a new set of physics. Are you good in that rule or not?
But even the breaking of the rules that you have established, those breakings follow rules.
Right. It follows as soon as you've broken the rule, it establishes a new rule.
You have to clue in why.
But you don't necessarily have to clue in
or you
why.
Don't have
you just have to.
But you
use
have
it.
to establish that there is a reason. Like it's not just like, oh, just kidding. That rule's not a rule.
I guess almost kind of like
unless
Jedi
of course that is.
Yes, Jedis and lightsabers. Everything has to follow. Since the lightsaber is established, everything has to follow the rule of a lightsaber, essentially.
Right.
Which put a bunch of holes in people's minds. Like, why don't you just turn the lightsaber on into people? And then, of course, when the movie technology caught up, they did it because it only makes sense. Like that should happen.
I think it's actually
there's a bunch of old lore about like why they function, but then that's the thing is they had to fill in those blanks because people were poking holes in it. So they had to establish the rules.
If you have to write a 5-page wiki to establish why only one of your characters can break the physics of your world, you're failing. Is like that, and in practical application of movies that were made in the 80s and 90s, there's a reason. The technology wouldn't let them do what they wanted to do in all circumstances. So, willing suspension of disbelief.
So they technobabbled their way into it.
Right. But so what were you going to say about establishing physics breaking rules, Marky, or rules breaking behavior?
Oh no, I was just gonna say about the whole turning lightsabers on and off. I think I heard or read somewhere that essentially it's extremely, it's like taboo essentially. Like that's why they don't turn lightsabers on and off in a battle, because
it's an honor thing.
Exactly.
Well,
even
that,
among
and
it's
kind of like a mutually assured destruction. As soon as the first guy does it, then the other guy's going to do it, and then they're both going to do it to each other.
Right. But why wouldn't but why wouldn't somebody do it is the thing. Somebody would, and eventually somebody does do it, but
but here's the other thing is they're both essentially, if they're both force, sensitive, they're both precognizant and they could see it coming.
Yeah.
And if they could see it coming, they could defend against it.
But
so it was rendered moot.
Yeah. Lightsabers are a really good thing to bring up in this case, though, Marky, for a completely different reason. Lightsabers are often talked about as being light weapons. Like they're really, but it's not a light weapon. It's not a flashlight.
No, it's a plasma blade.
You can't just swing it around and dissect everybody in a 90,000 light year radius, because it's a plasma blade. It's a projected solid object, which is why it has weight, which is why lightsaber tactics have weight to them, a lot like a sword has a weight to it. It doesn't have the same weight of a sword. A lightsaber moves differently, but a lightsaber moves with weight. This is actually one of the reasons why some action films and some horror films can seem a little weird and sketchy. Weapons, guns, firearms have weight, and we have a very established timeline or a very established past of how heavy certain weapons are. So when the rules of weapons weight are broken, it either needs to be convincing in the scenario. For instance, Hopper firing an AK-47 one-handed, fully extended into the Demogorgon's mouth makes sense because of who Hopper is, all the shit Hopper's been through, and the way that he's braced in the scene. But in Gunslinger Girl, the anime, a little girl holding 2 AK-47s at full extended arm length and firing them both full auto doesn't make any goddamn sense, and it breaks the established settings unless you've established why that character can do it.
And then the third kind of point of that same triangle, Schwarzenegger flipping the shoddy while riding a motorcycle.
That gun does not exist. There's never been a gun that's loaded like that. That's a shotgun.
I was going to say,
you can flip. It doesn't flip the same way, but there is a technique that you could use to flip a lever action like that. But it's essentially you flip it down and then you're rolling it an extra 360 rotation and then flipping it back up. There's no reason for it to just spin flip.
Yeah. What were you going to say about Berserk, Marky?
I was going to say Berserk is a perfect example of this. Guts, the main character, has that
giant,
like 7-8 foot long slab of iron that he swings around.
Yeah, that giant broadsword.
It's like Cloud Sword.
Exactly. The Dragon Slayer, and essentially it was nobody can use this. It's like, well, Guts has been swinging, large sword since he was 5 years old. This was just essentially,
and he swings this thing one-handed.
Yeah, he swings it. He
Right.
literally only has one arm, so he swings this around with one-handed all over the place. So it's a perfect example of like him breaking the rules of swinging this large weapon that nobody else can swing. They touch it and they're like, "How do you? This isn't a normal weapon."
Yeah.
Well,
but
they
Buster's
also like talk about it throughout the series. Like they're just like, oh, you with that stupid sword, like that ridiculous sword. Like they make comments on it. You know.
what I really find interesting. So first off, that's interesting because the Buster sword is definitely a thing that exists in a lot of anime. That style sword is very prevalent through anime.
Oh yeah, because
and that character who can swing it with one hand too.
And that kind of stems back to ancient folklore. Like there was always like the biggest dude in the village who can swing the fucking dai katana.
Yeah,
the Nadoche, like.
But the thing is, if you look at those historical swords, I have one here. I have a Grossmesser in the corner that is what I used to fight with when I fought. It's a big ass heavy sword. It's 6.9 ounces, 6 pounds, 9 ounces. That's a big sword. People look at it and go, that's not big. And I'm like, swing it for fucking 15 minutes. And then and they'll be like, oh,
and of
this
course,
is
you know, for anime, they're gonna blow the proportions crazy.
Right.
But it conveys the big fucking sword concept.
Yeah. So the thing that always gets me is this. So the lever action rifle existed. It existed. Yellow boys are a thing. However, the mayor's leg, the cut down lever action rifle that is super prevalent in like Westerns and sci-fi Westerns and all that, Zoe's gun, if you've seen Firefly, essentially what the shotgun that Schwarzenegger uses in Terminator 2, that is not
flipping an 870.
It is, but it's built on, they literally saw a mayor's leg in an old Western and were like, let's make a shotgun that's a mayor's leg. It's a completely made up gun. It didn't exist.
No,
nobody ever fucking used it.
a lever action shotgun existed. It doesn't have
a lever action shotgun existed. A lever action shotgun with a big ring that allowed you to flip it like a mayor's leg.
Oh no, yeah, exist. that was a custom made. That was a custom made lever.
Oh, you're saying that it was modified so he could do that.
So he could spin it. Yes, yeah. It's a large oval lever, and that's for spinning, and that was developed like in the fucking 80s.
Okay. Like it's shit that was made for trick shooting that was never intended for firearm. Like
there's a show called The Rifleman, which is about a dude who uses a Winchester, but he's got a big hoop as the lever, and it's all about him being a trick shotter with it.
Because I had a pellet gun that I could almost spin, but it was a jank ass spin.
Well, it's like the whole idea of like sawed-off shotguns. Like sawed-off shotguns, obviously you can make them and they existed, but the idea that they were used. Like the other big example of this is the Morningstar, probably used in like melee combat as in the sport of melee combat, and probably used like on people's walls, probably not actually used on the battlefield.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the whole holding a minigun.
Shooting the trees.
Yeah, didn't happen.
So the last tip that we have is don't lose sight of your story. So stick to the story that you've laid out and the elements and rules that you've established and the emotional journey that you're intentionally crafting. One of the reasons that Lord of the Rings is so easy to stay invested in is that the relationship between Sam and Frodo and their struggle against a supernatural power are grounded in real-world trauma and emotional response. The ring is twisting Frodo, possibly even killing him, and his best friend has to watch this happen in real time. And Sam is constantly trying to fight it and help him through the entire thing. The same holds true on a much shorter scale for possessions like that in the Evil Dead and in the Evil Dead remake. They watch this person that they have an emotional investment with get twisted, and they're trying to fight against that. But in both cases, the reason that those work is because the concept of the story that's being told is held true through the entire time. In contrast, it's hard to really get into and follow some of the heresy books because Space Marines are very much based on power fantasy and they're not easily relatable. And the reason that Space Marines aren't easily relatable is the only way that you can ratchet up the stakes in power fantasy is to continue ratcheting up the stakes. And at a certain point, you just get these wooden, one-dimensional, I shoot characters that just aren't relatable. You lose sight of the story you're trying to tell. Getting in and lost in the details and trappings of the story can derail your designs just as fast as they can confuse and lose the audience who's reading it. So you always want to have a clear map. We talked about that in our in our last creative writing tip episode, our first creative writing tip episodes, I guess a good way to call it. And we've talked about it in our other creative writing episodes. You want to establish your arc and you want to stick to your arc and you want to come back and refer to that often. Write it down early, figure out what it is. And it can be super simple. John dies at the end. It could be the fucking title. Dale and Tucker versus Evil. It's the fucking title. Like you use these things slowly throughout the story to make sure that you're still on the same track. So before we wrap up today, we wanted to get to a couple of questions that our patrons submitted to us through Patreon and through our Discord community. Now you can join our Discord community right now for free. But if you're interested in interacting with us a little bit more and possibly driving the way that our episodes end up or being involved in these Ask Us segments, hit us up on Patreon. $3 a month gets you video podcast access and a couple of other things, and you can jump right in. So starting off at the top, the first question that we got was, how much humor is too much humor? And that came from Ickbard. So I'm going to take a really quick stab at this because I think I've got a really bad answer and I'm interested to see what you guys have to say. So I think that you can't necessarily have too much humor in horror. You just risk turning it into satire of horror. Good examples of this are Cabin in the Woods, Tucker and Dale versus Evil, the Evil Dead series after the first film. But there are really good examples that balance it really, really well, like Scream. I think you want to balance, I think you can balance humor properly, but you risk turning it into satire. I think the best way to look at it is that you want to use humor or you want to use personal connection moments to draw in that breath, that moment of rest before you spring the release of tension. So if you were writing a scene and you spent the first third if you spend the first third of the scene building up tension, and then you spend the second third of the scene in an emotional conversation between two characters that ends on a joke, you can spend the last third of that scene really ramping into that really, really ramping into that horror element and that twist. I think that's the balance that I would use. However, obviously, like fucking Wes Craven didn't do that when he wrote Scream. Scream is probably half and half humor and horror, but it works. The way that it's built, the way that Scream takes the piss out of the slasher genre, reinvented the slasher genre. So there's obviously ways to push it and pull it. I think that's probably like the biggest political waffle answer ever. How about you guys? Anybody have any more insights on humor and horror?
Yeah, too much. Yes,
that's kind of what I was saying. Is you can add it infinitely until it turns into satire, but and also the same thing, like you have to use it to punctuate or break up tenser moments,
right?
Yeah, personally, I don't like humor in my horror. If it's the second that there's any type of humor, I consider it like satire. So like Krampus is a really good example. There is some it is a horror movie, but once you start having gingerbread men trying to kill you, catching fire, it's like, okay, this is no longer a horror movie for me. This is like, it's just kind of like
Krampus was definitely a little on the satire side at times.
It's definitely like, it definitely has some horror element, like a lot. It is a horror movie. But the second it became funny, I was kind of like, okay, well, I've lost all my sense of horror in this. I can't take it serious now.
So you're more of a funny moments in horror than humor in horror.
Yeah, like if there's a
Okay.
funny moment, like Jason is a horror movie, but it's like the type of humor in it is like the girl getting bashed up against the tree in a sleeping bag over and over again. It's like, oh God, like that was
Or the chick getting her face frozen in not
yeah,
hydrochloric, but yeah, and then smashed in Jason X.
yeah. It's so, like it's the type of humor, I guess, not so much the
Right.
amount. So the type of humor matters more than the amount, I think, because you can have essentially like dark humor moments, but the second you start adding like jokes and like just unreal,
Going over the top of it.
yeah, unrealistic. Like, oh, I can't say unrealistic. Once you start like having those more funny moments, then like, oh, this is just a dark humor moment, then it loses the horror for me. So I think like any amount of funny is too much in horror for me personally.
Got you. Tom?
See, I really like my favorite is like Cabin in the Woods. I loved
Peak.
Cabin in the Woods. Like I loved it. I thought it was great. Because for me, it's if you're gonna add humor into it, it needs to be real humor. As in like like Cabin in the Woods when he's got that giant like bong, or I'm sorry, it's like a coffee cup, and he like opens it up into this giant bong,
Yeah.
and like people look at him and they're like, oh my god, dude, you're fucking ridiculous. And he's like, whoop, and he's like, just ready, got my cup to go, and it's like that stupid thing. And it's like, yeah, like I could see someone saying something like that, like the mermaid when it's like the dude is like laying there and he's about to get killed.
You gotta be fucking kidding
yeah,
me.
and he's like, yeah, and he's like super upset about it, and it was like for me, that's when it's right, when I can see myself legitimately being scared about something and then cracking a joke, like to ease my own tension, or to like at that point, like he was there, he knew he was gonna die, and he was just like, motherfucker, you know what I mean? Like that's when I think it's right. That's when I'm like, yes, this is good. Fucking shit like Sharknado, I'm like, get out of here. Like shit like in Cloverfield, like in the mockumentary Cloverfield, like there's a couple moments in that where like he cracks a joke or something and he's like, and they both kind of laugh and he's like, sorry man, just trying to ease the tension, like he even says it,
just try to cope, man.
Yeah, like those are the parts that like that's the humor for me. Like if you can put it in realistically, you know what I mean? Like don't force it,
I think for like, so when I say no humor, I think I think that the perfect time for humor is in the initial point of the initial parts of the movie where there is no tension just yet.
Shit hasn't gone wrong yet.
Yeah, shit hasn't gone down yet. Now's the time to crack your jokes, and then from then on, once the tension starts building, you're gonna lose steam in your tension by cracking jokes.
The first Alien movie was like that. They're all cracking jokes, all through the beginning until they get fucking sent to the planet. And even then, they're still cracking jokes all up until the one dude fucking gets his face eaten, and then they let him back on the ship. And then it's like are we still cracking jokes, guys? Like,
yeah.
Or is this or is it game time now? Or and then it quickly becomes apparent to all of them that it's game time.
I feel that Scream does it really well too, because Scream plays with it constantly. But Scream is like there are things that are master classes in writing, and I feel like the first Scream movie is up there because Scream mixes horror and humor the entire time in a way that I don't think I could do. It's the way that the easy humor is used and the way that the easy humor like is utilized, and it's all that nervous, as Tom just pointed out, it's all that nervous energy humor. None of it is like, oh, I just flew in from London and my arms are super tired laugh track. And it's none of that stuff. It's all like, it's things that teenagers would say and do to one another in that situation to break the fact that like, well, what the fuck do we do? How do you pull ideas from the monsters and spooky dooky tropes that exist, but twisted enough so it's unique and able to stand on its own? And this comes from Minion. So again, to take first crack at it, I think you pick what you want and then you mold the monster or the trope to what you're writing. And we've already done this a couple of times. We did it when we introduced Sumpfoot, the idea that there's some sort of like lost Ogren style monstrosity or hairless rat that's wandering around the sump. And we used a lot of the Sasquatch, a lot of the Bigfoot tropey ideas around it. And then we tweak it. And we laid it out really quickly. What I would do, or what I do when I take something that exists and I tweak it and twist it, is that I just keep moving, the goal line a little bit further down the line. I did it with Katya. Katya is essentially a vampire. The way that I wrote the Katya short story was, this woman was a servitor, and Tzeentch activated in her something that allowed her to basically act as a vampire, and then somebody got close enough and she was able to drag them into her, and she was able to eat their essence. She was able to drink of them, and then that restored her beauty. And now she basically has to perpetuate that system of living over and over and over again. And it's very easy to see that as soon as I explain it that way, that Katya is just a fucking vampire. I just placed that vampire in a techno society, and I placed the ways that happened through technobabble. And I think it's that easy. Yeah, you're changing the trappings. I think it's that like easy, cooking. But it can get way more difficult.
Yeah, I think as far as like uniqueness, once you get to a point like because nothing's original, right? Or like it's very hard to be original, especially
at
nowadays.
This point.
Yeah, to be unique is just to put your own spin on it, and it's already unique. If you're trying too hard to make something unique, you're losing the nostalgia of what it originally was. So like Sumpfoot, for example, we could have not called it anything like that, but by calling it Sumpfoot, you're like, oh, that's like Bigfoot. But then you put your unique spin on it, like, oh, like it's a hairless rat, it's an ogren.
You immediately have rules to apply to it.
Exactly. So you're putting that uniqueness to it, but it's not like people are going to hate you, or not hate you. Hate is a strong word for it. People are not going to knock you for having that uniqueness of something that has nostalgia to it. Because once you can call it something else. Like, let's say you start calling it like, oh, it's I don't know, it's Big Finger. It's like, oh, what the hell is Big Finger? Oh, it's like Sam Squatch, but it's not. And they're just kind of like, okay. Like, so having that uniqueness is nice, but giving flavor to something that already exists, that people have that nostalgic feeling towards, makes it better, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I agree. Because it gives everybody kind of a clear point of reference to, what do I know that's most similar?
Right. Any other thoughts on that one?
Thanks for coming. We'll be back next week.
So the last question that we got, or the third question that we got, is from Saker. Saker asked, how does one write an incomprehensible horror like Cthulhu without becoming either repetitive or downright edgy? I think my biggest way to answer that question is go back and listen to part 1 and see if you can't peel the answers out of that. Writing cosmic horror is a lot about leveraging. My real answer, my answer for you, I guess, is a lot of writing cosmic horror is really leveraging the language and pacing of gothic horror. You really want to focus on the reasons that something drives a person mad, or the reasons that something is unknowable. And I realized he had followed this up by saying, like, obviously, it's really easy to fall into the trap of being like, oh, well, I just didn't understand what I was looking at. And like, I totally get what you're saying, because I've struggled with that on my own. I think the way to do it is to write those when you're in the moment of writing it. You write that down. Jim didn't understand what he was looking at. Something about the blah, blah, blah just was incomprehensible. And you use those like filler words, knowing that you're going to come back and fill it in later. And then you rely on things that we understand in our world, or principles that we understand, physics principles, mathematics principles, taxonomy principles, and biological principles that we understand, and then you tweak them. One of the ways that Lovecraft did it a lot was that he used non-Euclidean. He would talk about non-Euclidean geometry, the idea that you're looking at something that has too many angles, or the math that doesn't follow the Euclidean model that we are used to. Things that break the geometry perspective that we're used to looking at things in. That's one of the ways to do it. Another way to do it is to mess with perception, or to give the character understanding in the moment, but then as they recall it later, either internally or to other people, every single time you do it, you change the way they recall it little by little until they're left with this idea that there's this blank spot in their memory. Or you just do that. You know, they looked upon the face of the Gujima Hutsits, and then they glanced away. And upon looking at it again, they were greeted by an unknowable horror that they had never glimpsed before. And then, you know, when asked to repeat it, they could only say, oh, it looked like the blank face or the bland face of an attractive man or woman or something like that. You play with these ideas that perception and reality aren't matched up with each other without just saying, oh, he's gone insane. Or, as Tom had actually outlined earlier, you build the entire story around the fact that the character thinks one thing is happening while the audience understands that the opposite is happening. So this character is building an understanding of what they're viewing or what they're doing, but the reality is they're either doing the opposite. He thinks he's saving his wife. No, he's killing his wife. Or what they're witnessing, I am seeing myself help. I'm actually hindering. You play with those two sliders, kind of those two idea sliders in opposition to one another. But my biggest, I guess, tip on that is write it the way that you're worried about it sounding, just so you get it down and you know the story beats where you want to bring it up. If you want to really point out that this dude is losing his mind over 5 or 6 paragraphs, put in every paragraph that he's losing his mind. Then go back later and try to figure out the wording you want to use to do it. And borrow shit that already exists. Lovecraft does this a lot. King does this a lot. Coons does this a lot. Anne Rice does this a lot. Dan Abnett does this a lot. There's a lot of authors that play with this idea of either seeing something you can't comprehend or losing your mind slowly. Look at the way they describe it and borrow it.
I was as I'm reading Gaunt's Ghost, and I'm sure as you're listening to it, every time they progress into a new room or a new section of trench, it's always described as having signs and symbols that cause the eyes to hurt and the mind to, wander to dark places. It never tells you what they look like. It just tells you that they're not, your brain just can't understand what it's looking at. And that vagueness is all you need.
Yeah. It's describing the effect, not the cause.
Well, that's a really good way to put it too.
I was gonna say angels, I guess, would be a good example of this. It's just unfathomable kind of. I guess that would be a good example. But I think Ryan, you hit the nail on the head as far as answering his question.
All right, guys. Well, that'll wrap it up for our second part of creative writing, horror, and suspense. We've got a lot of other creative writing topics that we want to get into, including building black markets, building economies, and building gods and religions. So we'll definitely be back around things that surround these concepts of horror and all of that. If you have any questions about what we went over or want us to expand any on our tips, you can either email us those questions at underthehiveofmadness@gmail.com or jimdarkgaming@gmail.com. You can also join our Discord server and ask us directly. That's a great place to find us.
It's where we're pretty much all active. Well, most of us are active all the time. I'm pretty much on there almost every other day.
If Discord's not your speed and you're still wanting to try to connect with us, you can do that with our website or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We have links to everything down below to help you find everything easier. You can also find me specifically on TikTok if you're interested in getting involved with some of the content that comes out of the podcast through that means. If you are interested in helping the podcast grow, there are 2 different ways you can do that. The first is by liking, reviewing, and sharing us wherever you get your podcast fix. We know that we are on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, Anchor, and many more. The second way is to help us grow directly over at our Patreon, which is www.patreon.com/underthehiveofmadness. All Patreon members, as we've mentioned a couple of times, get access to a video podcast. And the other thing that you get is eligibility to enroll in our 4 times a year quarterly. That's what that's called. Our quarterly painting contest. We do a painting contest 4 times a year. The next one is underway right now, and it's all about horror elements and wraps up on October 31st. So if that strikes your fancy, head on over and check that out. There's also some other things there, including this Ask Us Everything kind of helping us decide where we're going to take the podcast further. And there's some art and role-playing assets that we are dripping out over time. Raising hell and raining unholy terror over the habstacks of the Underhive. We are 665.66 UHMR Chemrat Radio, bringing you the ruthless truth whether you want it or not. Keep those dials set to scan, catching us here. The same ratty channel, same ratty ass attitude.
Excellently done.
Never invite a four-armed emperor over for tea. They're always late, and they get blood, mostly yours, all over your fine china.
That was a good one.
All right, guys. Fuck.